Hello YouTube. I wanted to do a video on my thoughts when it comes to the whole stop killing games debate. I just wanted to explain my position on it. So a little bit about my background. I'm a client services technician or senior client services technician uh, at an educational facility. And so my job is to essentially support client software, set up lab computers, set up faculty computers, and act as a liaison on other issues between faculty and students, as well as systems and networking and some of the other departments and within our technology services umbrella. So some of my experience is getting older software to work. A lot of times the software is made by a company that doesn't exist anymore. So I'm not entirely sure the legalities of it, but as far as I can tell, it's technically not illegal if you had already purchased software and that licensing agreement says you own that copy to get it working on a newer computer than they originally intended. In a lot of situations, it's 16-bit software trying to get it working on 64-bit Windows because Microsoft, I think there's some security reasons why decided not to allow 16-bit software to work in 64-bit versions of Windows. And that's when Windows Vista got a lot of the flack that did was because that was essentially the first version of Windows to mainstream 64-bit. So when all of a sudden they mainstream 64-bit and all this software that people have is written in 16-bit, especially in factories and industries like that, the software just essentially didn't work. And so when I first started, there was this one program as a DOS-based program for grading that we had these few faculty members that wanted that thing to work until they retired, and they only retired in a few years, so they had this grand expectation for my department to get this thing working so they can just retire on it and stuff like that. And they were just so loud about it. My boss is like, okay, whatever you need, he's like, just do. Because like I'm just tired of hearing these guys. So I got working inside of DOSbox. So that's one of the things that, or one of the cases where I succeeded in that, and that program worked fine in DOSbox. Uh, so then uh, another instance was like, actually this one, the company is still compiling their software for 16-bit. I'm not sure why, but it's for their frame alignment machines. For some reason, they won't compile 32-bit or 64-bit versions of their software. Apparently, they're probably using some sort of pointer or something that only works on 16-bit. I'm not sure. Maybe something to do with their hardware only works with 16-bit. I'm not entirely sure. But it's like, yeah, so I had to get 32-bit Windows working in Hyper-V and interface it through a name pipe to a serial port on the host machine and got the software working that way. So generally, if there's no documentation or anything like that left behind by unsupported project or a non-existent company anymore, you have to resort to hacks like that to get something working. And unfortunately, it's like, especially in industry, there's no option to just be like, this thing doesn't work. It's like, so when you have a facility where it's like this frame alignment machine, let's just not use it because we can't get the software working. That's not an option because it's like the my employer already paid like tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars for this machine. And they're like, this is the only software we provide for that machine. It's like, really have to get this thing working with no documentation or help from the company because they're like, it's our software. However you run it is up to you. So it's like, so situations like that, or if the company doesn't exist anymore, you own a valid license for that. I don't see the problem in resorting to a hack to get working. But it's like if the company is willing to just toss baton to the community as they give up supporting that project, such as a game developer, maybe we won't have to resort to hacks like that. We'll just be able to, I don't know, just run a dedicated server and then somehow point the game client to that dedicated server instead of forcing game companies to either host the thing forever or just sunset and be like, sorry, you can't play it anymore. And especially single player games, like I don't see why they just can't get single player games to just work offline in some situations and then just be like, okay, you can play offline. And maybe co-op games on a dedicated server. Massively multiplayer online games might be undoable for that just simply because it takes entire server farms sometimes or entire data centers to host those games. Sometimes I don't think the community is able to provide that sort of resources or is willing to. Um, but who knows? They might be. Maybe some MMO game company could be like, hey, we're going to try this and let's see if the community is willing to just rent data centers that host these games or just figure out a more efficient way to host them. It's like they might surprise me even when it comes to that. But I just I generally support the stop killing games idea because I'm like, if we want to revisit these older games, it's nice to just be able to host our own servers if the game developer servers aren't going anymore. Like, yeah, it takes money, it takes resources to host the thing, so the game developers themselves shouldn't be forced to keep hosting games that are 10, 20 years old. It's like just make the dedicated server daemon available to the community. They can host community can host their own private servers and just give instructions to the clients to or the players to be like, this is how you connect your client to our uh, community server. Um, I disagree with some others. Like, I don't think it should be on the game developer to help track down and shut down rogue private servers because that still takes resources. I think instead, when they go to sunset a game, in my optimal scenario, I think they should be like, okay, we're going to make the dedicated server available, and we're going to uh, give the tools to law enforcement to be like, here's this program that you can run to identify if this server is running, or to even just pull chat logs from that server or something like that, stuff that law enforcement would need to do. Run this one to track down the IP address of the person hosting the server or whatnot, or their account ID or whatever. Um, and just give law enforcement the tools to push the liability onto the people hosting that private server. Because a lot of times these rogue servers do break laws, right? So it's like, so just give law enforcement the ability to crack down on that for these private servers and have that be part of the process of passing the baton to the community. So it's like, so I come from an era back when I was a big time gamer. Was back in like 2016ish or whatnot. One of the games that we played were the Left 4 Dead series, and to this day you can go on Steam and download the dedicated server for the Left 4 Dead games. Like so, even though the game kind of shoehorned you into the auto matching and stuff like that, I you could still run a dedicated server and then just instruct uh, players connecting to it to just be like enable the console in the game, uh, run this command to connect to this dedicated server. Uh, that's something that could still happen even after Valve goes, we're not going to host the servers for this game anymore, even though it's a live service game. Then people can just host dedicated servers and just pass on the instructions, be like, this is how you connect to the dedicated server. I don't see that as a huge problem even for indie game devs. Indie game devs seem to actually point this way anyway, right? A lot of the indie games that I've played, at least, like use a client server thing that's more open. So then that way, like, yeah, if they do decide to drop support for the game, then they can do something like that. Here's a dedicated server. Here's how you connect the game to uh, a different server. Have fun. Then that way the liability shouldn't be in the hands of the game dev anymore. But one of the other things too, I watched a few other videos on it before I decided to make this one, and I watched Coding Jesus's video on it, and uh, and one of the things I wanted to point out, even though I'm not this big expert programmer and stuff like that, when he was reviewing the code that uh, Pirate Software was writing on the screen and stuff like that, like for the data structures, Pirate Software is using numbers in place of these name values. But apparently, in newer versions of GML, which is the scripting or the programming language that GameMaker uses, you can use named keys in your data structures. So essentially, what name key is, I'll do it in Python here. Uh, First, I'll make the font a little bigger. I'll create a dictionary just named game state. And then like, oops, let's do something like that. So essentially, we have game state and then we have the main character. So essentially, like, if for some reason on a line of code, I wanted to get the main character's name, I can do something like, I'll just print it just so then that way it'll show in the console. I can go like, and close that, and then I can immediately go into another data structure under that, and then just go name, and close that parenthesis, and it just prints that name. Or if for some reason I wanted to change the name, uh, let's say the player goes into the menu and then changes the player name or whatnot. So I can go game state. And GML might work a little bit different, but it is kind of similar to Python in a way. Um, and we'll just go name. And let's say um, they change it to Samantha. So then if I do this again, that's changed. So you can do that in your programming instead of just using integers for everything. So like when you're looking back at something, because sometimes like I'll write a program. I do have my GitHub, and I'll link that in the description if somebody wants to take a deep dive on my GitHub or whatnot to see what my experience is. I don't really care. Like, go ahead and do that. Maybe it'll give me more views. Um, but when you use integers all the time for your keys and data structures, as what GML calls it, you can confuse yourself later on. So you write the thing, and you work on something else in a project or work on another project for a few months or something like that. And you revisit this and you go, holy shit, now I have to figure out what this integer means. And if you don't, like I saw that he was leaving comments and stuff like that, pirate software was. But if you forget to put a comment in or you make a mistake in writing that comment, uh, then you have to go back to your definitions and be like, okay, when did I declare that? And you can do duplicate values too. Like if for some reason I go like game state 1 or something like that, and equals, and for some reason let's put a name in there. So if we print game state, is that you can see that that's on there. But for some reason, like I go into the code and I just lose my numbering for some reason, my definitions. Uh, and do 10 or do that and just do like Bob or something. So now if I print the game state, it's like that's changed. Then you run the code and you're like, why is this reporting back to something that I don't expect it to? And you gotta go through and then hundreds and hundreds of lines of code for your or where you initialize this game state or data structure and go, oops, I accidentally duplicated that number and whatnot. Like my live stream yesterday, I kind of had to do a lengthy read on error message and figure out that I forgot a percent sign. You make dumb mistakes like that all the time when you program. It doesn't matter how good you are, but making your code sustainable enough to where you can look at the error screen and be like, oh yeah, that's where the error is, and you know to jump right to it. But if you don't know exactly where the error is, like especially in a situation like this that doesn't throw an error, so you gotta debug the thing, run it through a debugger step by step, and figure out where it's declaring that different value that you're not expecting. And it gets messy. So when you start using main values instead, like using maps in your data structures instead of just using arrays, uh, because this seemed like this is what he was doing uh, in his code, is that you're less likely to confuse yourself because, for instance, name is more explanatory and easier for your eyes to pick out when you're debugging the thing than a random number is. But that's just my thoughts on it. This is longer than I want it to be anyway, so I guess I'll see you in the next one.